Snortius the First, the great snot boss of Snotopia, the uncrumpable, the unburnable, the monster killer, the Humy stomper, the ape slayer, is not in this story. No, this is the story of the commandos of Byzantium. Snotbo looked over his boys as they gathered their equipment for the journey. He picked his nose in deep contemplation. He trained his boys well. They should go and do a proper job. Unfortunately, Snotbo would not be able to join his crew on this most important mission, for he was tasked with an even more important mission to scout the big Humy town south of Megahumiopolis and report to Snortius himself. Punch-and Bag, Steve, Two Heads, Shade, Slash, and Grotbo were mentally preparing themselves for what they would see beyond the dark woods. Snotbo himself hadn't dared go beyond the dark wood. But the glory of Snotopia knows no bounds, as the grots and grotlings applied their blue and purple paint. Sneaky and Lucky would serve them well, they hoped. Now you lot are going up north to see why all the stuff is weird up there. Right, so I just want to let you... Squigolicus, what are you doing? Put down that snot! Squigolicus, Snotbo's trusty squighound, had apparently gotten a bit peckish and chomped down on one of the freshly sprouted snots. Later this snot would be posthumously named Chew Toy. Ah, you already ate half of him. Well, at least chew more quietly. I'll try to tell me boy stuff. Where was I? Oh, right, yeah, some of you might not survive. Yeah, there's lots of weird stuff up there. And if weird stuff is there, you lot need to know that weird stuff tends to get boys snicked. Stay on your toes. Remember your training. Keep your nose clean. Steve, I'm leaving you in charge while I go do stuff for the boss. You take care of Squigolicus too. I think I need to do my mission all on my own, so I can be super duper sneaky. Now, Steve had been alive since the old days of the big hunt for the great horned beast, along with Punch-and Bag and Two Heads. The Grotling beamed with pride at being chosen to be boss for this mission. With Snotbo's final blessing, the group set off for the mysteries of the North. The commandos brought along a healthy contingent of snotlings, 5 for each of the commandos. Now, they weren't as quiet as fully trained commando grots and mutated grotlings, but they were very expendable, and in an emergency, they were edible, as illustrated so expertly by Squigolicus. At first, the journey was largely uneventful. The snotlings were a little louder than normal commandos, but the beasts of the dark forest seemed to give them a wide berth. The horn beasts and tree hounds seemed to remain a good distance away from the advancing troop. Squigolicus's stomach growled and gurgled loudly, and the beasts that had been lingering on the edge of the commando squad's vision darted away into the woods. Steve shook his head. This was too loud. This crew would need to shape up if they were in a tight spot where they needed to be dead cunning and sneaky. As Steve's crew moved forward, the dark woods began to thin a little. The normally thick and nigh impenetrable canopy now had gaps in it, and it allowed the diffuse light from the cloudy sky above make its way down to the forest floor. More and more often, the greenskins could see gray dead trees and old stumps on their journey. Further along, they would see more dead flora, and many of the trees that were still alive were stunted and pale-looking. Out of curiosity, Two Heads approached one of the pale, stunted trees and slashed through the bark with his stabber. Even though it was spring and the sap of the trees should be rising, very little oozed from the wound the green skin carved into the tree, and the sap looked more like dirty water than normal, vibrant tree sap. Two Heads made a face. Well, more accurately, he made two faces. Well, both of his faces made the same face.
Hey, this gooey stuff looks really weird. Let's make one of the snorts lick it.
An unfortunate snot was seized from Two Heads' mob and selected to be the guinea pig. Two Heads immediately dubbed him Liquor and proceeded to press his face into the unpleasant-looking sap from the diseased tree. The sap tasted as horrible as it looked, and the snotling began spitting and wiping the disgusting stuff from his tongue. But he seemed unharmed.
That tasted awful!
Two Heads amused himself by continuing the snotling's suffering, and began to bully him into eating the weird stuff again. Soon Liquor was vomiting his little guts up as Two Heads cackled with cruel delight. Eventually Steve put an end to the torment.
Alright, quit mucking about. We've got porty stuff to do. Let's move out.
Two Heads reluctantly ceased bullying the snotling as he grumbled and got back in line. As the mob pressed forward, a thick fog began to roll in, and an eerie quiet settled over the dark forest. The fog seemed to smother all other sound in the woods. Steve believed this to be good cover for the commandos. But then he realized that they were supposed to scout out the northern dark woods. How could they scout if they could not see? As Steve pondered the benefits and disadvantages of being unseen but not being able to see, he got a whiff of something strange. It was an odd smell. It was rank and putrid, like rotten meat. As he followed his nose, a dark and terrible shape came into view. It was a large creature by the look of it. Steve and the other commanders recognized it as a great horned beast. A cry of surprise went up amongst the snotlings as they beheld the creature, because there was something very wrong with it. Its fur was matted, and its body was covered in pussy sores, burns, and bald patches. It also became quite obvious that this abomination was the source of the terrible smell. Strings of drool dripped from its mouth as it looked left to right with panicked, shock-white pupilless eyes. It let out a terrible braying sound before lowering its horns and threatening the greenskins. Before anyone could react, it charged, hooking and tossing its horns. And unfortunately, it skewered and flung an unfortunate snotling that had been following Punching Bag, who was abruptly named Kebab. The other greenskins drew their weapons and prepared to fight. Steve led the way as he darted forward with his stabber and stuck it directly into the creature's chest. Another ugly, bellowing bray erupted from its throat. Punching Bag attempted to move behind the creature, but it bucked and kicked. Fortunately, the grotling was able to dodge, but he wasn't able to get in close to make use of his stabber. With the creature distracted from the front and the rear, Two Heads took a running leap off a nearby tree with a coil of rope in his hand. He managed to get a loop around the elk's neck, with a plan to jump down to the ground and pull it off of its feet with the help of his snot squad. The snots began to chant for Two Heads as he rode the bucking creature.
Monster Rider! Monster Rider!
Squigolicus, the faithful squighound, never turned down a chance to eat. So he lunged forward and bit at the creature's throat, tearing out a proper chunk as thick blood and pus oozed from the wound. The squighound immediately spat out the hunk of meat and made a few retching noises. Shade decided to take the same opening that the squighound did and brought his blade to the creature's throat. And with one swift movement, he sliced right through the diseased elk's neck, and the creature fell to the ground. Its mouth continued to open and close, and its body twitched as foul-smelling semi-coagulated blood oozed from its neck stump. A cheer went up from the mob of snots, which was quickly silenced by Steve. They were lucky that they only lost one snotling to this beast.
This thing is ugly and smelly. We ought to burn it. I don't want none of you lot getting all oozy and icky.
It might have been a wise thing to do, burning the body, but the stench of the creature somehow became worse when it was burned. Many of the greenskins felt their stomachs turn sour, and poor Liquor, who was already feeling pretty sick, was pushed over the edge as he began dry heaving. Squigolicus was also not feeling too good. The hound emptied his stomach of the partially digested snotling bits as he alternated grumbling and whimpering in discontent. Two Heads looked to be ready for another round of taunting and tormenting poor Liquor when something strange began to happen. Liquor's eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell to the ground. Drool began to drip from his slack jaw as he began to shake and mutter to himself.
There's a big wall. Gork and Mork. The big wall. It keeps us out. It keeps them in. It keeps us out. It keeps them in.
The natural response to Liquor's ravings on the part of Two Heads was, of course, to smack some sense into him and drag him back into the formation with the others. But it could not be denied that the health and strength of poor Liquor was definitely compromised. After another hour of walking, the greenskins exited the fog, and Liquor was no longer ranting as he was able to stand on his own. The trees continued to thin out until Steve spotted what looked like the edge of the dark forest. It was nearly the beginning of evening at this point, but the light that remained became brighter and brighter as the forest ceased being a true forest and simply became a grassland with occasional trees here and there. The soil beneath their feet also changed and had become an ashen kind of gray, and the grass seemed about as lifeless and sick as all the trees.
Hey, boss! We are not making Liquor eat the grass. Oh, fine.
Steve shook his head as his eyes scanned the field. There were more stumps here, but unlike the ones in the forest earlier, these trees looked like they had been cut down. As the crew crept forward, something else came into view. A fence. A very tall fence. Steve scratched his head. If the thing Liquor was babbling about was this fence, well, it wasn't much of a wall. A thought entered Steve's mind. Perhaps licking random trees was not the most effective form of divination. But what to do now? Should they find a way past this fence? Or should they turn back and report what they found?
Hey, Liquor, did you see something when you was babbling about stuff? Did you see this fence? Is that what the gods showed you? I don't know. I just remember a big wall, not a fence. And it was really big. We weren't supposed to go in. And the thing inside wasn't supposed to come out.
Steve pondered the words of the snotling, whose normal healthy green complexion had become pale and sickly. The commandos walked slowly and crouched, using the tall gray grass as cover. Suddenly, Steve stopped in his tracks and dropped to the ground. He turned back to the others and whispered to Punching Bag.
"Pass this down the line, but look over there. Can you see it? Right over by that little hill thing."
Steve pointed out, and Punching Bag squinted, scanning and trying to spot what he meant to see. He was looking at the small lump in the grass. It looked totally unremarkable, just a small hillock, until he saw movement inside.
"Yeah, that's right. You see it now, yeah? That's our bunker up there. Full of humies, too. Oh, we needs to be dead cunning and sneaky. Where there's some humies, there's more. Bet there's loads of humies behind that big fence."
Steve pulled out a pair of magnoculars that had been looted from the Humies in Mega Humiopolis and took a look. Sure enough, there were 2 soldiers inside. They were wearing helmets and uniforms, but there was little else he could see through the narrow gap in the fortification.
"I want to try to get in and scope out the place, but we got to be dead sneaky. Let's wait until it gets dark. Humies can't see nothing in the dark."
And so the greenskins stayed put as they waited for the sun to dip below the horizon. As day turned into evening, floodlights began turning on all over the fenced facility. Most of the lights were on these very tall poles, and they were pointed at all of the gray grasslands around the fence. By the time night fell, most of the boys had recovered from the sickening encounter with the beast. Liquor and Squigarlicus were still feeling a bit under the weather, but they were improved. Looking at the lights, Steve picked his nose as he considered what to do next.
"All right, we're kind of stuck here. I think we need to try to move. And if we do that, the humies are going to spot us. So what we do is, we tunnel. We start digging. Squigarlicus leads the way, and we just keep throwing the dirt behind us as we follow. Then we get under the fence, and we start snooping."
And so the long, slow work of tunneling began. Squigarlicus, who was normally forbidden from burrowing all over Byzantium, was finally given the okay to do what his little squiggy heart always desired, and he went to work. The grots and snots all filed in behind, a few getting healthy clawfuls of dirt flung into their faces. The work was slow, but it was sure, and after many hours the greenskins burrowed right up to the fence. Once they got up close, the greenskins could see that there was a second fence blocking them further. It was unlikely they'd be able to dig under that one without being spotted. The snots and grots could go to the left or the right to explore this place. Then it came time to decide who would venture into the Humie facility. Steve, Two-Heads, Shade, Slash, and Punching Bag were the most experienced. They were the most likely to be successful. But it is important to remember that Gretchen are not orcs. They are generally quite cowardly and unwilling to put themselves at unnecessary risk. Now, snotlings are also quite cowardly, but they aren't very good at recognizing dangerous situations. So when it came time to decide who should move forward, the grots were happy to let the snots be the ones to stumble their way through the Humie fort. And who knows? They had at least 2 good days of commando training. Maybe they'd make it. 4 snotlings were selected for the journey into the Humie fort. 2 were to explore to the left. The other 2 would go to the right and see what they could find. Liquor was amongst the snotlings exploring to the left. As the snotlings moved into the fenced area, It became immediately apparent that this facility was much larger than they realized. This place dwarfed Mega Humiopolis. Beyond the fence there were many Humies and trucks and Dakka guns of all kinds, many buildings as well. The Snots had never seen so many Humie boys. The Snots stuck to the tall grass, which offered them decent concealment, as Snots were only about a half-meter tall. Unfortunately, the grass also hid something. Empty ration tins that had been discarded by some of the soldiers. The Snotlings did not see them as they crept forward, and one of them, who was immediately named Clumsy by his compatriots, accidentally stepped into one of the tins and fell into a small pile of them that were discarded along the fence. Shouts went up as Clumsy got to his feet, and the unfortunate Snot was immediately vaporized by a las shot. More Humie voices cried out in reply as more las blasts flew through the air. The remaining 3 Snotlings tried to sprint back to the safety of the tunnel. Liquor, Slug, and Expendasnot 2 ran for their lives as a hail of fire rained down upon them. Liquor and Slug were gunned down where they stood, while Expendasnot 2 managed to slip back into the burrow. The Humies were in an uproar. Steve was in shock. He didn't think 4 little Snotlings would cause such a fuss. Whenever Greenskins found Snotlings someplace they weren't supposed to be, they'd just toss them out and go about their business. Then, the more cowardly of two heads began to look nervously around.
Look, we needs to leg it, boss. Those Humies are gonna come for us.
Steve swore to himself. His first mission where he got to be the boss and everything went straight to Zog.
Zog it. We got to get back to the boss. If the Humies didn't know we was here, well, they definitely Zogga know it now. Gah! Oh, Zog me, Snotbo's gonna snick me in me sleep. We got to get back and tell Snotius. We got to get back and tell everyone. They know we're here.
No man do they call me. My mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Hey everyone, and thank you all for listening to the latest episode of Growing the Tribe. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a like and a comment so that one day you too might be trusted with an important task and fail spectacularly at it. Now, if you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear more stories about tiny greenskins trying to infiltrate a heavily defended military facility. If you would like to support me, links to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Teespring are down below. And if you want to contact me for a collab or throw money at me to do voice acting for you or, whatever, my business email is also in the description. And if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you can click on the Growing the Tribe playlist, which should be appearing on screen right now. Thank you all once again for listening. No Man out.